Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. I got to see the city last night, and I would imagine that more people would be here if the city weren't so amazing. It was an amazing nightlife and great food, so thank you for coming to the first presentation. Okay, so yesterday, Matt Swenson painted a picture about the market opportunities for cold brew. And he shared some data about the growth of the segment. And I feel like that was a really great way to get us started. Cold brew is big. It's growing definitely in the US. It's growing all over the world as a market trend that really seems to be here to stay. I'm here to talk about the story of how cold brew can really impact your coffee business. I'm here to talk about the love of cold brew from a sensory perspective and why cold brew as a brewing method can open up doors to opportunities that you may not have been aware of. So let's start with what cold brew isn't. Cold brew is not a marketing term. It's a brewing method. And so a lot of people talk about cold brew as just something they need to have on offer because it's growing in popularity. It doesn't matter what it is, they just need to have something. And I'd like to challenge you to consider the possibilities of cold brew as a beverage unto its own that really deserves and will benefit from the time and attention that you put into the rest of your coffees in your program. So what is cold brew? Cold brew is a brewing method that essentially replaces time for temperature. So most coffee brewing methods use steaming hot water and coffee grounds to extract a hot cup of coffee. With cold brew, you're not using heat. So you're extracting the compounds out of the coffee bean by using cool or ambient temperature water. You essentially steep coffee grounds in cool water for an extended period of time. We like to say at least 8 and up to 24 hours. So it's a very different brewing method that yields a quite different chemical composition in the cup. It tastes quite a bit different. The sensory profiles are different and stay stable over a longer period of time. So what makes a hot cup of coffee taste so amazing when it's brewed fresh are the same things that make that coffee taste stale and sour after hours, minutes, and certainly days. With cold brew, the flavor profile stays consistent over hours and even days if properly refrigerated. And so it's really opened up a whole other category for coffee professionals all along the value stream to experiment with something that will give them more options. So one of the things that is really important to note about cold brew is you're not going to know how a coffee will taste when you cup it hot. So just to rephrase that a little bit, because cold brew has a very different chemical composition and sensory profile, if you're evaluating coffee through traditional cupping, you're not going to know how it's going to taste or how it's going to perform as a cold brew. And that matters because many coffee professionals don't take the time to understand how the coffee that they have will perform as a cold brew. I think there is a lot of exploration that all of us in the coffee profession can do with cold brew. And I'm going to chat a little bit more about different opportunities for roasters and producers. But coffee professionals all across the industry have some work to do, but also some adventures ahead of them in terms of coffee exploration. So the Coffee Science Foundation, which is an arm of the Specialty Coffee Association in the US, recently commissioned a study called Towards a Better Understanding of Cold Brew. The partner who's done a lot of the research is UC Davis in California, and some of their research is starting to be published. Some of the initial research has been really focusing on the sensory attributes. What's different between cold brew and hot water extracted coffee? They controlled for all sorts of factors in terms of total dissolved solids, serving temperature, et cetera. But basically, when you have a cup of coffee tasted side by side, a hot brew and a cold brew, what's different about it? And the sensory panel came up with some interesting findings. On the cold brew side, the flavors of sweet and floral were much more prominent in the cold brew cup. Whereas on the hot brew cup, flavors of bitter, burnt, and sour were much more prominent. And that's not to say that the hot brew cup was bad. It's just that when the sensory panel was taking their notes and outlining what they tasted, bitter, burnt, and sour came up consistently in the hot brew cup. And in the cold brew cup, sweet and floral came up much more consistently. So those are some of the high-end common flavors that are different between hot brew and cold brew. There's also a lot of ways to influence the flavors in the cup of cold brew, similar to what you can do with any of your coffees, whether it's meant for filter extraction or espresso. Pay attention to roasting, and developing the flavor profiles in the roastery can have a huge impact on the taste and flavors in the cup. Similarly, there are a wide variety of brewing parameters that can influence the flavors of the cup. So cold brew cupping is something that my team has been working on for the past several years to help develop a method to make cold brew cupping or sensory analysis easy, to make it easy to adapt into your coffee business, whether you're a producer, a roaster, a cafe owner, a barista, or someone like me who just loves to drink coffee and learn more about the flavors and how they relate to the origins. So just a high-level outline of cold brew cupping. When we started on this project several years ago, we had been told that, you know what, I can't waste my good coffee on cold brew. A lot of the cold brew equipment out there uses a fair amount of coffee, and people didn't want to spend the money or the time to experiment with cold brew when they didn't know what the outcomes would be. And so we decided it would be really helpful to put together a method that would make it easier for them. So our team started with the standard Specialty Coffee Association cupping protocol, started with many of the methods that Q graders use, and broke it down into the components that really could stay the same so that it would be familiar to coffee professionals, as well as what are the components that needed to change for the brewing method. We have a variety of free resources on our website to help you understand how to do this, but in essence, there's a few things that need to change. Cold brew, for example, doesn't form a crust. So when you're clearing the cups with traditional cupping, it's pretty easy to take the spoons and clear the cups. With cold brew, it doesn't do that. The grounds stay in suspension, so you need to have some sort of filtration method. You also need a larger vessel than you would with traditional cupping, in part because the the CO2, the bloom occurs over a longer period of time. And if you prepare a cold brew cupping with the traditional cupping bowls, you come back several hours later, and in many cases, they might be overflowing. So again, there's a handful of things that we learned and put together in a cupping protocol and form that's available for free at coldbrewcupping.com. And I have a workshop later today that will go more into that in detail. But we found that with having a method for sensory analysis and side-by-side comparison, it made it significantly easier for coffee professionals to understand what they had in the cup and to understand what program opportunities they had. One of my favorite examples of coffees that we serve in our tasting room in Loveland, Colorado, is a natural process Ethiopia Yergachefe. And as a young and aspiring coffee professional, when I first went to a cupping, I really didn't know anything about sensory analysis, and I remember, sitting or standing around the cupping table. It was in Seattle at the time, and I was asked, what are you tasting? And I said, it tastes like coffee. I didn't really know what they were asking for. And back to the comparison slide, there are flavors such as bitterness, such as burnt notes that tend to overpower some of the more delicate fruity and floral flavor profiles that are in a cup. Coffee professionals who are seasoned tasters can kind of train their mind to taste the more subtler flavor profiles. But for new coffee tasters, it's really hard to do that. And so with this Ethiopia, when you cold brew it, it tastes like blueberries. We have had people come into our tasting room, we serve this to them, and they ask us what we put in it. They think it was flavored or sweetened. Did we mix it with a syrup? And it's really a conversation starter. Because those bitter compounds are not extracted out of the bean, the blueberry flavors really come up to the surface. And it's a really exciting way to teach people about how to taste coffee. And even more so, people don't necessarily understand why a coffee would taste like blueberries or why a coffee might taste like jasmine or stone fruit if they've always been served coffee that was covered in cream and sugar. So cold brew is a great way to teach people not only about the flavors in coffee, but why those flavors exist. Varietal, origin, processing method, careful crop tending, roasting, all of those things that us as coffee professionals put into the coffee for them to enjoy. Cold brew is a really great way to teach those stories about coffee. For producers, I think I'd also like to challenge you to consider how your coffees will perform as a cold brew. One of my very first experience at Origin was at Rusty's Hawaiian in Hawaii, in Ka'u. And they, at the time I was in the cold brew business, and so they prepared a cupping for me, which was basically they brewed one of their award-winning coffees with the cold brew method, and then they also brewed it with traditional hot brew. I think they did a pour over, and they served it to me side by side. And it was a really eye-opening experience for me to understand how the coffee tasted with different brewing methods. It was the exact same coffee, harvested, processed, roasted at the same time, right on that farm, and it tasted significantly different between the hot brew and the cold brew. And I think, through that experience, And discussing this with the producer right there on their farm, it occurred to us that producers really need to know how their coffee is going to taste and perform with a variety of brewing methods. With the data that Matt shared yesterday with regards to cold brew, there's more and more consumer demand for cold coffee. But roasters, beverage makers, cafes need to differentiate themselves. The consumers are not just wanting a generic cold cup of coffee. They want a special experience, and they want something that is going to be memorable and something that will bring them back to the cafe. And I think all of us in the industry play a part in that. So for producers, there may be something extraordinary in the beans that you have on offer that's specifically applicable to cold brew. There may be marketing and sales opportunities right in front of you that you may not be able to uncover unless you give it a try. So anyway, that's just kind of a high-level overview of cold brew sensory. It's very easy to do side-by-side cuppings, comparisons. And again, it's not really intended for grading. Understanding the cup scores of your coffee is important, but understanding the flavor profiles and the sensory opportunities is something that cold brew cupping can really help you with. Again, we have a workshop today this afternoon. I'll be here all day. I love talking about cold brew. It's hard to put this all into 20 minutes. All of our resources for cold brew cupping and sensory analysis are available for free on our website at coldbrewcupping.com. And our education team would love to answer your questions after the show as well. Whether or not you use our equipment, we really want to be here to support coffee professionals, learn more about cold brew, and really help leverage the trend in this brewing method to help grow your business. Anyway, I'd love to take some questions. Yes, we have the workshop today, and we're about to launch an education platform so that we can offer online trainings. So if you want to find me after the talk or email education@toddycafe.com, we can connect you with some of our online training opportunities. Thanks. Yes.
En su experiencia, ¿qué diferencia?
Okay, hold on a second. Yes.
Listo. En su experiencia, ¿qué diferencia ha encontrado en el cold brew obtenido en el método de Kyoto por goteo y en el método por inmersión?
Okay, great. So the question is about the difference between cold brew in the Kyoto or the drip method versus immersion. There's a lot of similarities. Both are what I would consider purist cold brew in that you're not introducing heat at all. And you can achieve very similar flavor profiles with both full immersion and drip methods. Drip methods have some challenges in that it's very difficult to make a concentrate, and so the amount of time it takes to drip, there's only so much volume that you can get. And so there's some operational challenges with the drip methods that are solved with full immersion. So full immersion, you can brew at various strengths so that you can brew a concentrate or a ready-to-drink strength or almost anything in between. A lot of people say that the drip methods can be cleaner or brighter, and I think a lot of that has to do with how you would brew the same coffee in full immersion. So I think you can achieve very similar flavor profiles with full immersion. It just takes a little bit of experimentation. Thank you.
Buenos días. ¿Cuánto tiempo puede durar un cold brew embotellado sin añadirles aditivos?
Okay, so he's asking about how long can cold brew stay fresh without additives after bottling. So as Matt discussed yesterday, when you're bottling a cold brew, you're really more in the beverage business, less so than in the coffee business. So there's a lot of regulation in the US and in different parts of the world with regards to food safety. Most of what my background is in food service, so brewing the coffee fresh, serving it fresh, up to a week after it's brewed. That said, there are a variety of methods to enable that coffee to stay fresh longer, such as pasteurization, that really don't change the flavor aspects in the cup, just makes it safer. So if you're going to be bottling cold brew, I'd recommend that you work with a local consultant or a processing authority to help make sure your bottled cold brew is safe, and they can help you understand how long it's going to be safe for your customers. Thanks.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Diego. Soy novato en el tema suyo, me gusta mucho. Ayer tuve la oportunidad de poder probar el cold brew acá en la exposición. Le preguntaba a la niña sobre el tema de la preparación y me dejó aterrado que se quieren más o menos 160 horas para fermentar un café y que me dé un sabor a vino. No sé en esta parte cómo es eso en cuanto a las catas que usted ha hecho para el cold brew en algunas fincas.
Okay, so he's asking about a 160-hour fermentation period. So I'm not actually familiar with what you're describing. I think there's a variety of ways to process coffees before brewing. Most cold brew extractions are anywhere between 8 and 24 hours. And so if you're brewing longer than 24 hours, the compounds have been extracted from the coffee bean, and what's happening after that, I think is specific to the coffee and the temperature. So I'm actually not familiar with what you're describing. I think in order to pull out different flavor profiles in the cup, however, you can experiment with different brewing times and grind setting, water quality, et cetera. So I'll have to go try that coffee myself so I can have a better understanding. Again, there's a lot of experimentation and exploration happening in cold brew, and I think there's new horizons. So I think we're out of time for questions. Thank you so much for being here. And I'm here for the rest of the day on site, and I'd love to have more conversations. Thank you.